Awaken your shadow. The truth sets some people free. It offends everyone else. By Seth, the Red Neo, Cherupak.
Chapter 3, Part 3, Owl, Serpent, Phoenix.
"I think I'm going insane," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. His successful tech company was about to close a Series B funding round. His social media following had just crossed 100,000. From the outside, he looked like another Silicon Valley success story. Yet here he sat in my office, tears streaming down his face, describing experiences that sounded more mystical than medical. "Sometimes I feel like I'm watching myself from outside my body," he continued. "Other times everything feels intensely real, like I'm truly awake for the first time. Then it all crashes down and I'm drowning in anxiety again. Am I losing my grip on reality?" I smiled, recognizing the telltale signs of what the ancient traditions called the dark night of the soul. Mark wasn't going insane, he was awakening. The devils we've explored, Mammon's greed, Asmodeus's lust, Belphegor's sloth, Azazel's wrath, Beelzebub's gluttony, Leviathan's envy, and Lucifer's pride, aren't just spiritual adversaries. They're the guardians of three distinct thresholds in consciousness. Each devil's temptation carries the seed of a specific awakening. Think about how a snake sheds its skin. The old layer must become uncomfortable, even painful, before the serpent is driven to scrape it off against rough stones. Our spiritual evolution follows a similar pattern. The very demons that torment us are also creating the pressure needed for transformation. This is what your value intelligence has been trying to tell you all along. Those distortions in your systemic understanding, they're preparing you for the owl's gift of penetrating wisdom. The chaos in your extrinsic choices, it's making you ready for the serpent's power of transmutation. The confusion about your intrinsic worth, it's clearing the way for the phoenix's fire of complete renewal. The ancient mystery schools understood this process intimately. They knew that spiritual evolution isn't about defeating demons, it's about recognizing them as twisted reflections of divine powers waiting to be reclaimed. Your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your higher self in exile, waiting to be called home through three distinct awakenings. The owl comes first, teaching us to see clearly in darkness. This isn't just about developing insight. It's about penetrating the illusions that keep us trapped in survival consciousness. When the devils of physical temptation torment you with greed, lust, and sloth, they're actually forcing you to develop the owl's penetrating vision. Every time you resist immediate gratification for higher truth, you strengthen this power. The serpent awakening follows, bringing the wisdom of emotional transmutation. Those devils of emotional torment, wrath, envy, and sloth, are actually pushing you to discover the serpent's power of shedding old skins. Each time you face an emotional storm without being consumed by it, you're learning the serpent's art of transformation. Finally comes the phoenix, representing complete spiritual rebirth. Lucifer's temptation of pride creates the pressure needed for this ultimate transformation. Just as a diamond requires intense pressure to form, the Phoenix Awakening needs the crushing weight of spiritual crisis to catalyze complete renewal. Mark's experience was classic Serpent Awakening territory, the disorienting shift as consciousness expands beyond its familiar boundaries. I've watched dozens of people navigate these thresholds, each one convinced they were losing their mind when they were actually finding their soul. This is the journey that awaits you, those devils that have been tormenting you. They're about to become your greatest teachers. The very energies that have kept you trapped are about to become the forces that set you free. The shadow aspects you've been fighting are about to reveal themselves as the undeveloped character traits of your higher self. New subheader, The Owl Awakening. The owl awakening is your first taste of real spiritual power. Like dawn breaking after a long night, this awakening brings clarity to a mind previously clouded by limited or distorted beliefs about yourself, others, and the world. This is the awakening of the divine masculine, the power to penetrate illusion with clear sight and disciplined thought. When this awakening comes, you'll notice your mind cutting through the noise and distractions that once consumed your conscious thoughts. Where you once saw overwhelming complexity, you now perceive underlying patterns. Where confusion once paralyzed you, clarity now guides your decisions. The constant mental chatter about money, status, and survival begins to quiet, replaced by a steady, penetrating clarity. On Dr. David Hawkins' map of consciousness, this transformation typically lifts awareness from the survival levels below 200, where fear, desire, and anger dominate, into the rational levels, 200 to 400, marked by courage, neutrality, and willingness. While these levels are a profound advancement from base consciousness, they're still far below the higher territories of love, 500, joy, 540, and enlightenment, 600 plus, that the later awakenings will reveal. The Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks of this as the dawning of luminosity, when consciousness first pierces the veils of Maya, illusion, that keep us trapped in base reality. The Upanishads describe it as the eye of wisdom opening. In the Christian tradition, this is what Paul meant when he wrote about having the eyes of your heart enlightened, Ephesians 1:18. Modern neuroscience confirms these ancient insights. Dr. Andrew Newberg's research shows how this awakening literally rewires our brain's default mode network. The constant self-referential chatter, what Buddhists call monkey mind, begins to quiet. The amygdala's fear response dampens while the prefrontal cortex strengthens, creating what Dr. Richard Davidson calls the neural substrate of wisdom. The neural substrate of wisdom is your brain's ability to stay calm and steady when life presses in. It's what's happening when your heart rate jumps, a problem lands in your lap, or someone pushes your buttons and you don't snap, shut down, or spiral. Your amygdala no longer hijacks the moment with panic or defensiveness, and your prefrontal cortex stays online long enough for you to think clearly. This is the difference between firing off a text you regret and choosing your words, between blowing money to calm anxiety and making a grounded decision, between freezing, lashing out, or people-pleasing, and holding your ground without force. You still feel stress, anger, excitement, or fear, but they don't run you. You stay present, assess what's actually happening, and respond instead of react. Wisdom at this level isn't mystical or abstract. It's your brain learning how to pause, see the situation for what it is, and choose your next move without being dragged around by emotion or urgency. This is a clear and noticeable sign of the owl awakening. This transformation profoundly impacts your first three selves. Your secure self emerges from shadow, transmuting mammon's scarcity-driven greed into mature discipline and sustainable abundance. The thought forms of scarcity and lack that once possessed your consciousness begin to dissolve. You discover what Christ meant when he said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you." Your adventurous self awakens next, turning Asmodeus's blind lust into focused passion and authentic excitement. The indulgent thought patterns that once drove you to fill inner emptiness with external consumption transform into genuine enthusiasm for life. This is what the Bhagavad Gita means when it speaks of action without attachment, pure engagement without compulsion. Your sovereign self rises last at this level, transmuting Belphegor's paralyzing sloth into genuine power and independence. The parasitic thought forms that once made you seek independence through conquest or collapse into submission lose their grip. You begin to embody what the Tao Te Ching means when it says, "He who knows others is wise, he who knows himself is enlightened." The owl awakening creates measurable changes in brain function. Dr. Sarah Lazar's research at Harvard shows increased gray matter density in regions associated with self-awareness, compassion, and introspection. The constant activation of survival circuits begins to quiet, freeing up enormous mental and emotional bandwidth. More profoundly, this awakening breaks the first bonds of conformity. Remember how we discussed the spiritual sickness of trying to fit ourselves into the machine of industrial age thinking? The owl's vision lets you see through these cultural illusions. You begin to recognize how many of your personal thoughts were actually collective programs running on autopilot. This clarity brings remarkable benefits. You develop real discipline, not the rigid control of willpower, but the natural order that comes from seeing reality clearly. Your decisions become more focused and intentional. You stop being trapped by false choices and limited thinking. Most noticeably, you gain a commanding presence that others can sense. People start seeking your insight, drawn to the quiet authority you now carry. The first form of loneliness, alienation from your authentic self, begins to heal as you see through the matrix of social conditioning. You start to recognize your true nature beneath the layers of adaptation and performance. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of meeting oneself through the dissolution of the persona. The owl awakening corresponds to the first steps on what the Apostle Peter called the ladder of divine qualities. In 2 Peter 1:5-7 he writes, "Add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge self-control." This is precisely what the owl awakening achieves. It transforms raw faith into tested virtue, virtue into genuine knowledge, and knowledge into self-control as lived application. The higher rungs of this ladder, perseverance, godliness, brotherly kindness, and love, are the domain of the Serpent and Phoenix awakenings. This is where many spiritual seekers get stuck. The owl's gifts are so impressive compared to survival consciousness that it's tempting to mistake this first awakening for the final destination. Your newfound mental clarity and personal power can become a subtle prison, one built of sophisticated concepts rather than base fears. Like climbers setting up camp on a false summit, many seekers build elaborate philosophies and teaching systems around this level of awakening. This is what happened to the elite philosophers of ancient Greece. They achieved magnificent heights of intellectual understanding, but many of them became snagged at this level, giving in to the passive pride of Narcissus. The same pattern appears in modern academia and corporate leadership. Brilliant minds who have mastered the owl's penetrating vision but never develop the serpent's emotional wisdom or the phoenix's spiritual surrender. The owl's light illuminates the path ahead, but walking it requires the feminine mysteries that only the serpent can reveal. While this first awakening frees you from survival-level thought forms, the deeper emotional and spiritual possessions await their own liberation. As the Hermetic axiom states, as above, so below, each level of awakening follows the same pattern of seeing through illusion into truth, but at progressively deeper levels of your being. New subheader, The Serpent Awakening. The Serpent Awakening brings emotional clarity, maturity, and power. Like a snake shedding its old skin, this awakening strips away layers of emotional armor and reactive patterns. This is the awakening of the divine feminine, the power to transform raw emotion into mature wisdom. When this awakening begins, you'll notice a profound shift in your emotional landscape. Where you once rode waves of reactivity, you now sense deeper currents of feeling. Where emotional storms once overwhelmed you, you now perceive their patterns and purpose. The constant need to control, compete with, or withdraw from others begins to dissolve, replaced by authentic presence and natural confidence. On Hawkins' map of consciousness, this transformation elevates awareness from the rational levels 200 to 400 into the first realms of genuine power, 400 to 500. This is where acceptance, 350, transforms into understanding, 400, and where reason gives way to love, 500. Yet even these profound states of the Serpent Awakening fall short of the enlightened states 600 plus that the Phoenix Awakening, the third and final awakening, will reveal. The ancient mysteries spoke of the descent before the Serpent Awakening as entering the underworld, when consciousness descends into the depths of feeling to retrieve lost parts of the soul. The Greeks called this katabasis, a necessary journey into darkness to reclaim buried treasure. Jesus demonstrated this power by descending into hell before his resurrection, showing that transformation requires us to face and integrate our depths. In short, where the Owl Awakening brought structure, the Serpent Awakening adds vision. Modern neuroscience encodes this process into scientific language. Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal research reveals how emotional clarity and maturity reorganizes our entire nervous system. The sympathetic, fight, flight, and parasympathetic, freeze responses that once ruled our emotional life begin to balance. The vagal brake strengthens, allowing us to remain present with intense emotion without being overwhelmed by it. This transformation profoundly impacts your next three selves. Your compassionate self emerges from shadow, transmuting Azazel's volatile wrath into mature confidence and authentic power. The thought forms of anxiety and control that once drove you begin to dissolve. You discover what Jesus meant by "the meek shall inherit the earth," which tells us that true power comes through surrender, not force. Your charismatic self awakens next, transforming Beelzebub's compulsive imitation and validation seeking into genuine self-expression and natural influence. The compulsive need to fake it till you make it, or to compete or compare yourself with others, transforms into the acceptance and expression of your unique voice. This is what Lao Tzu meant when he said, "He who knows contentment is rich." Finally, your intuitive self is the crown of the Serpent Awakening, transforming Leviathan's bitter envy into peaceful presence and grounded wisdom. The patterns of resentment and passive aggression that once spoiled your relationships lose their grip on you. You begin to embody what the Buddha meant when he spoke of the middle way, neither indulging nor suppressing emotional energy. But it's important not to mistake this middle way for the cliché ideas of emotional balance, moderation, or regulation. The Serpent Awakening is the axis of emotional clarity, maturity, and power through integration. Neuroscience shows us the remarkable benefits of this awakening. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research shows increased integration between the emotional centers of the limbic system and the regulatory regions of the prefrontal cortex. What he calls vertical integration allows emotion and reason to work together rather than fighting for control. The constant emotional hyperarousal that once drained your energy begins to settle, creating a new baseline of regulated alertness. More profoundly, this awakening breaks the second bonds of conformity. Remember how we discussed the social matrix of shame, guilt, and fear? The Serpent's wisdom lets you feel through these emotional programs. You begin to recognize how many of your personal emotional reactions were actually inherited patterns running on autopilot. This emotional liberation brings extraordinary gifts. You develop real confidence, not the brittle armor of arrogance, but the natural authority that comes from emotional maturity. Your relationships deepen as you learn to stay present with both your own feelings and others' emotional states. Most remarkably, you gain an authentic presence that others can feel. People start opening up to you, drawn to your capacity for genuine connection. The second form of loneliness, alienation from others, begins to heal as you learn to create authentic bonds. You start to experience real intimacy beneath the layers of social performance and emotional guardedness. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of heart knowledge, understanding that comes through feeling rather than thinking. This awakening corresponds to the middle rungs of Peter's ladder of divine values, 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5 to 8. Where the owl awakening built faith, virtue, knowledge, and self-control, the serpent brings perseverance, godliness, and brotherly love, philos, chachri, phileo in Greek. Your emotional resilience allows you to maintain spiritual practice through challenges that would have once derailed you. Your deepening wisdom reveals glimpses of divine nature in everyday experience. But here too lies a seductive trap. The serpent's gifts are so healing compared to emotional immaturity that many seekers mistake this awakening for complete enlightenment. Your newfound emotional wisdom can become its own kind of prison, one built of sophisticated spiritual bypassing rather than raw reactivity. Like therapists who have mastered emotional intelligence but missed true spiritual transformation, many get stuck helping others process feelings while their own deeper evolution stalls. This is what happened to many of the ancient mystery schools. They achieved profound heights of emotional wisdom, but fell into the aggressive pride of Icarus, believing they could soar to heaven through their own efforts. The same pattern appears in modern spiritual communities, sensitive souls who have mastered the serpent's emotional wisdom, but never submitted to the phoenix's divine fire. The serpent's power illuminates the emotional landscape, but crossing it requires the sacred marriage that only the phoenix can perform. While this second awakening frees you from emotional reactivity, the final spiritual possession, the illusion of separate self, awaits its own liberation. As the alchemists understood, the philosophic mercury of emotion must be united with the philosophic sulfur of spirit to create the philosopher's stone of complete awakening. New subheader, the Phoenix Awakening. Imagine waking up every morning with the feeling that every cell in your body is being consumed by ice-cold fire. A crushing weight presses your chest, making even the simple act of breathing feel like labor and scattering every thought and feeling like brittle leaves swept up in a windstorm. Imagine a feeling beyond anxiety, depression, or trauma. A physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and existential agony that comes from having your ego, your constructed identities, and even your thoughts and feelings burned to ashes and blown away in the wind while you're still alive to feel and witness all of it. The burning starts deep in your solar plexus or your heart as a cold flame that spreads through your nervous system until your entire being feels caught between freeze and fire. Sleep offers no escape. The burning follows you into your dreams, which are more often chaotic nightmares as you witness the shattered fragments of yourself caught in the orbit of a slowly dissolving axis. Food loses its taste. Colors seem to fade. The world you once knew begins to dissolve, and nothing rises to take its place. During my Phoenix awakening, I was haunted by the persistent feeling that I had been dropped from the sky onto some alien planet in a distant galaxy, where I lived as someone banished millions of light years from their home into a place where I didn't speak the language or even understand how to decode it. Everyone and everything felt cold, distant, and machine-like. Throughout this awakening, you experience a magnified and prolonged version of what the mystics called the dark night of the soul. But that poetic phrase doesn't capture the sheer physical and psychological torment of having your sense of self systematically amputated and dismantled like a junkyard car being stripped for parts. Imagine everything you think you are, your personality, your achievements, your carefully constructed identity, being fed into a cosmic furnace. This isn't just emotional catharsis or a mental breakdown, and it's more than an ego death. Ego death is episodic, symbolic, and often reversible, But the Phoenix Awakening is identity disintegration under sustained pressure, a complete undoing that offers no relief, no insight, and no return to what your life once was. These are the irreversible conditions under which the Phoenix Awakening occurs, not an experience to be had, but a life to be lost and resurrected through complete surrender. When it's over, you don't emerge enlightened as most people imagine and speak about it. You don't come out healed, purified, or permanently joyful. There is no stable bliss, no emotional immunity, no saintly calm that makes life easy or pleasant. What burns away is not suffering, but submission and illusion. You awaken not as a perfected soul, but as one the world can no longer reliably govern. You carry the scar tissue of this awakening for life. Your nervous system remembers what it endured. Your body keeps the score, not as a wound, but as a reminder. In my own passage through this fire, the cost etched itself into flesh, my hair shifting from fully dark to nearly gray in just 444 days as I wrote this book. And even now, long after the worst has passed, the cold interior flame still visits on certain days, a reminder that what was dismantled will never be rebuilt. After the Phoenix Awakening, you still feel pain, grief, exhaustion, and longing, but none of them can claim authority over you anymore. Fear still visits, but no longer persuades. Shame is present, but no longer rules. Illusion hangs in the closet of your memory, but you no longer wear it as an identity. What remains is a quiet, unbribable center, the witness through which you see the world clearly enough that returning to sleep is no longer possible. On Hawkins's map of consciousness, this transformation corresponds to the boundary between individual and divine awareness, 600 plus. But here's what the consciousness researchers don't tell you. Crossing that boundary feels like being torn apart at an atomic level. Many seekers who reach this final threshold turn back, retreating to the relative safety of emotional or even survival consciousness. Not because they lack intelligence or sincerity, but because the pressure becomes continuous rather than episodic. Those who break through do so only because they've learned the ultimate spiritual skill, complete surrender. The Phoenix Awakening corresponds to the final rungs of St. Peter's ladder spoken of in 2 Peter 1:7-8. The progression from love for your fellow humans, phileo in Greek, to divine love, agape in Greek. But reaching these heights requires passing through a fire so intense that most people who encounter it will do anything to escape. Honestly, I don't blame them. I went through my Phoenix Awakening while writing the first 3 chapters of this book. It was a physically, emotionally, and spiritual agonizing ordeal. It almost cost me my sanity and even my life. In short, where the Owl and Serpent Awakening brought structure and vision, the Phoenix Awakening infuses both with inexhaustible energy, not through force, but through surrender to a higher power. I absolutely do not encourage anyone, even my most mature and sophisticated readers, to seek out this awakening. If you're called and chosen, let it come to you in its own time and on its own terms. The Phoenix Awakening isn't the gentle warmth of universal love that New Age teachings promise. This is the consuming fire that Moses saw in the burning bush, the fire that burns but does not consume. The universe itself seems to conspire in this dismantling of your own self and your old life. A successful executive suddenly finds her company collapsing despite years of perfect performance. A teacher's career implodes just as he reaches his peak effectiveness. A seemingly perfect marriage dissolves without apparent cause. A stable living situation becomes impossible to maintain. This isn't punishment. It's grace wearing the mask of catastrophe, administered slowly enough that most people attempt to negotiate with it rather than endure it. Everything that can be shaken will be shaken until only the unshakable remains. Enter ye in at the strait gate, Jesus warned, For wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Matthew 7:13-14. Many are called to this awakening, but few choose to endure its flames for long. Fewer still remain when the fire offers no insight, no relief, and no audience. As Emerson wrote, "A man contains all that is needful to his government within himself. All real good or evil that can befall him must be from himself." The true meaning of these words becomes blazingly clear in the Phoenix fire. Dr. Andrew Newberg's brain imaging studies reveal why this awakening is so devastating. The neural networks that maintain our sense of self literally begin to dissolve. The posterior superior parietal lobe, what he calls the orientation association area, shows a dramatic reduction in activity. This isn't just altered consciousness, it's the biological dismantling of the ego structure itself. Dr. Candace Pert's research on neuropeptides reveals even deeper biological changes. The entire psychosomatic network, the body's cellular communication system, undergoes radical reorganization. The receptor sites on cells literally change their sensitivity and distribution. The very chemistry of consciousness transforms at its foundation. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali describe this state as Dharma Mega Samadhi, when all seeds of separation are burned away in the cloud of virtue. The Upanishads call it Vidyavada, the death of ignorance through direct perception of reality. Modern neuroscience confirms what these ancient seers knew. True transformation requires complete rewiring of our neural architecture. Through this divine fire, your higher self faces its ultimate test. This isn't about awakening new capabilities or refining existing ones. It's about complete surrender of everything you think you are, sustained over months or years without confirmation that anything better will replace it. The last and most sophisticated form of pride, spiritual pride, burns away in these flames. What emerges isn't another level of achievement or attainment. It's the cold and permanent death of the achiever itself. You might find your professional identity crumbling, a successful business suddenly failing despite your best efforts, or a thriving career hitting an inexplicable wall. Relationships that once seemed central to your life may dissolve or transform beyond recognition. Your carefully constructed world begins to fall apart, not because you've done anything wrong, but because the Phoenix fire must consume everything that isn't eternally true and internally aligned. Before this awakening comes the test, one that arrives after competence, insight, and spiritual identity have already been earned. Lucifer, the same light-bearer who once led a third of heaven's angels astray, now offers you spiritual status, teaching credentials, the role of guru or guide. This is the ultimate cosmic joke. Just when you think you're most spiritually advanced, pride takes its most sophisticated form. The fire burns this final illusion away, revealing that you are neither the light nor its bearer. You are not even the one being enlightened. You are simply the space where light already is. This is what sets the Phoenix awakening apart from all others. It continues long after the mind has exhausted every framework it once used to survive transformation. It's not an improvement or advancement. It's an elimination. The Owl awakening gave you penetrating vision. The Serpent awakening gave you emotional wisdom. But the Phoenix awakening burns away everything that stands between you and your fully actualized higher self. The alchemists encoded this process in their doctrine of solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. The solving is the systematic destruction of false identity. The coagulation happens by itself when all falseness is burned away. As Evelyn Underhill writes in her book Mysticism, the mystic way is the way of surrender, not the surrender of weakness to strength, but the surrender of self to love. This process mirrors the hero's journey, but with a crucial difference. In movies like Star Wars or The Matrix, the hero returns with new powers. In The Phoenix Awakening, the hero doesn't return at all, only the divine remains. This is why Neo had to sacrifice himself to save Zion. It's why Frodo could never return to his old life in the Shire. Some transformations are so complete, there's no going back. Dr. David Hawkins documented how rare this final transformation is. By any sober estimate, including my own lived reckoning, the attrition narrows to something on the order of 1 human in 100 million. Out of millions of people, only a handful ever reach the enlightenment level, 700 to 1,000, on his map of consciousness. Not because they aren't worthy or haven't practiced enough, but because they try to achieve enlightenment instead of surrendering to it. Even the thing we think of as the ultimate spiritual reward, the achievement of enlightenment, must burn completely away. The ancient traditions knew this. That's why the Zen masters say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. It's why Christ said, you must lose your life to find it. It's why the Sufis speak of fana, annihilation, before baka, remaining in God. The phoenix doesn't make you into anything. It dismantles the parts of you that needed to be something at all. It reveals what you are by burning away everything you are not. It is literally the end of who you were and the beginning of who you were born to become. This is why Jesus said, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Matthew 10:39. Jesus also warned that no one puts new wine into old wineskins, lest the wineskins burst and both be ruined. The Phoenix Awakening is this breaking. The old self must be completely surrendered before the new can emerge. This is the final stage of your shadow work journey, which we'll unpack in the remaining chapters of this book. From here, your journey demands more than just learning and understanding. Theory must become practice, insight must become embodiment, and shadow must become light. The remaining chapters reveal the complete process of transformation through shadow work. But remember, these 3 awakenings come in their own time and on their own terms. Our task isn't to force them, but to create the circumstances under which they can happen, and to prepare you through shadow integration and growth. Everything in your life so far has brought you to this point in time. Every struggle, every setback, every moment of darkness has prepared you for what's coming in the next 9 chapters. The very energies that have seemed to oppose you are about to become your greatest allies in your journey of authentic spiritual growth. Embrace this moment and treat it as a sacred initiation into your highest and most final calling.
End of Chapter 3 of Awaken Your Shadow by Seth Cherepak.